Thank you so much. I just wanted to get it started so we don't end up halfway through today's session and realize we were not recording. Busiswa, and then Gabriel, and then Hendrik.
Hi everyone, I'm Busiswa Mbechu. I'm based in the Eastern Cape. I'm the regional trainer for Children's Radio Foundation. I'm based in the Eastern Cape, Alice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Busiswa. I think I skipped Anna, who is just here, but I just would like everyone to introduce themselves so we know who's in the room. Anna, just quickly.
Okay, thank you so much, Ponso. Hello, everyone. My name is Anna, and I'm the lead coordinator for African Alliance. Thank you for taking time from your busy schedule. We know COVID-19 hasn't been that easy on everyone, and just having everyone in one place and learning more. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Ponso.
Thank you, Anna. And then Gabriel, Hendrik, Lucas, and then Lungi.
Hi, Ponso and everyone. My name is Itumeleng, and I'm a junior project associate for the Children's Radio Foundation. And just a brief on what Children's Radio Foundation is. It's a foundation that trains youth across Africa as radio reporters. So we give them the tools and the skills to make their voices heard. So what we do is that we partner on community radio stations. We get the youth to lead the shows on the radio stations, and they speak mostly about the issues that they face in their communities. So we work across 5 countries and we have 68 project sites. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Itumeleng. Hendrik, Lucas, Lungi. I'll just keep repeating the order there so we don't get confused.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Hendrik Kekana. I'm a producer and a presenter from Mutse FM. We are based in Limpopo. I've been in this media industry for 10 years. Oh, and I'm the most decorated presenter around here. I'm also a local facilitator for Children's Radio Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hendrik. Lucas? You have to unmute yourself, Lucas. I'm just going to move on to Lungi while Lucas unmutes.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lucas Shongwe. Mfanzi Lagut has already introduced himself to be working for the Highveld Chronicle newspaper that is based in Mpumalanga. It is a community newspaper that is reporting for 6 municipalities in Kangana district. Also, I would like to say I'm happy to be part of this workshop. I'm expecting to learn a lot, to grab a lot of information so that we can change our style of reporting as far as this COVID-19 thing is concerned. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lucas. Lungi, Lungi, Polisi, Notando, and then over again.
Hi everyone.
Hi Lungi.
Oh, I'm glad you can hear me. Yeah, just had a struggle there trying to unmute myself. My name is Lungi Langa. I'm a freelance journalist. Previously, I was working with Isolezwe as a health reporter, worked with Health E as well. I'm very excited to be part of this. Hopefully one can learn more about how to report on the COVID vaccine and on the virus as well. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Lungi. Polisi, Notando, again.
Hi everyone, my name is Olisi. I am based KZN and I am a regional mentor under CRF. I think my colleagues have shared a lot. That's me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mxolisi. Obakeng, Petronella, Sai, and Sponelo.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Obakem Manje. I'm a publisher and also editor for Taung Daily News, which is a newspaper based in Dr. Root, Sokomuti Mombati in the Northwest. So I am happy to be part of this workshop and also hope to learn a lot. And then hopefully the workshop will be fruitful to everyone, and also we will report positively going forward regarding COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Obakeng. Petronella?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Petronella. I'm from Limpopo in the Mopani District Municipality. Our newspaper is called Mopani News, whereby we service the 5 local municipalities of the Mopani District Municipality. The 5 local municipalities are Baphala Municipality, Greater Zanini, Greater Letaba, Greater Giyani, and Maruleng. I look forward to learning more about the vaccine so that we'll be able to give the right information to our readers. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Sai, Sikelela, Tembela, and then Tidiso.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sikelela Kholom, and I'm a youth reporter at Children's Radio Foundation from the East, and I am from the Eastern Cape, and I'm so glad to be part of this media workshop to gain more knowledge about the vaccine. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sikelela. I think we skipped Sai.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sai Matlangu. I'm from Wandebele in Kwaggafontein in Mpumalanga province. I'm the founder and the publisher of the print media called Mpumalanga Press. I'm glad to be part of this workshop, and I'm looking forward to learn more about this COVID-19 vaccine, intellectual property, and equitable access. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sai. Tembela, Tumelo, and then Tidiso, and then we're done.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Tembela Boy from Port Elizabeth. I work for Equitable FM, and also I am a local facilitator for Children's Radio Foundation. I have to say I'm very honored to be here today and to learn about the vaccine and to be able to report about it to my community. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tembela, Tumelo, and then Tidiso.
Morning, colleagues. My name is Tumelo Akadibakwane, based in Mpumalanga, in Nelspruit or Sembombela. I work for a newspaper called Mpumalanga News Zone. We print about 50 copies a month. It's a bi-weekly newspaper. I'm also looking forward to learn from this training so that I can have at least some answers when some of our readers ask the question about the vaccine. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think Tidiso is our last person, but he seems to have dropped off. So I'll just ask him to introduce himself in the chat. So thank you everyone for just doing those brief introductions. I think it's important that we know each other. There might be collaborations that come from this room between radio and print, online and print or radio. And so it's important that we know who's in the room so that if there are any conversations that anyone wants to pick up outside there. But I think to start, and it's something that I like doing when we begin a session like this, is to think about what does it mean when to really think about the difficulties or some of the problems that we may encounter as journalists, particularly, when you think about community journalists, a lot of the time, sometimes when you send a media query to the Department of Health, they don't really respond. And sometimes there are difficulties that community journalists face in reporting on issues such as COVID-19 and the vaccine that are not necessarily the same issues that perhaps a national journalist who works for News 24 may face when they are reporting. And there are also other problems or challenges that are universal to journalism, particularly when we think about the very few health journalists in the sector in South Africa. So when we think about these issues, it's really important for us to think about what are some of the challenges and what do we understand by intellectual property rights. A lot of the times, to be quite honest, for me, before I was a health journalist, these are issues that I didn't know about and that I only started learning really about when I started specializing. But it is also quite important to know that we can't all specialize. So what I usually do is I kind of do this, I'm sure you can see it, we do it live as we all speak, and just to capture everyone's thoughts and to kind of do a mind map that I'll also share. So I think we should just start there. What do we understand by intellectual property, but also about vaccines? I'll just do that and say also vaccines, particularly the COVID-19 vaccine. So please do just unmute yourself or type in this is just to start us off to see where we are beginning and how much explaining, even for some of our guest speakers, to know how to shape their talks as they will be giving us talks. So please feel free to write in the chat or to even just unmute yourself and tell me what you think or you understand by intellectual property rights or the COVID-19 vaccine. What have you heard? Do you believe it? And anything that you think that you think you will get the answers for in these next 2 days. So I can go first. Before I became a health journalist, like I was saying, I didn't think that intellectual property rights had anything to do with medicine. So it didn't make sense in my head that why are we talking about intellectual property rights and medicine, because medicine should be free for everyone. So I think I will just write that one down to say, I just thought intellectual property rights, IP, had nothing to do with medicine. Nothing to do with medicine or pharmaceutical drugs. Anyone else? Anything, there is no right or wrong answer in this case. It's just that we're trying to know.
If I may answer.
Yes, Mahmoud.
Medical research costs money. So typically it's the pharmaceutical companies that conduct this kind of research. Mm-hmm. And because it costs money, they invest money in order to conduct the research. And therefore they claim the rights to the research and to the findings that they make as far as the results is concerned on the research. And for that they either register their patents or the intellectual property rights to the research that they have conducted. So whatever products are manufactured, including vaccines that emerge from the research, that is what they claim the right to.
So I'm just going to say medical research costs money and pharmaceutical companies make patents to claim the right, and we can say and or profits, future potential profits to those drugs, right?
Exactly.
Okay, thank you so much. Profits to the drugs. Thank you so much for that, Mahmoud. Anyone else? I'm seeing something in the chat. Let me just quickly check. Actually, no, Lungi says she had no idea and thought it has something to do with company being smart enough to come up with the vaccines. I also thought this, Lungi. I just didn't, for the longest time, it didn't make sense to me that, medicine is created for anything else rather than the good of society. But as we have learned to learn that, profits sometimes come before people. So that's another thing. Anyone else want to share what they think about vaccines, or what are some of the assumptions that they made about intellectual property rights? And then they were surprised when all these conversations about a COVID vaccine and South Africa potentially not being able to get it because there are rich countries out there that have bought enough. For instance, and we'll hear about it at 10:30 when Fatima Hassan addresses us. For instance, when we think about a country like Canada that has reportedly bought vaccines for 5 times their population. And you ask yourself, you know, these are some of the questions as journalists we have to ask ourselves. It's like, why would a country think it is okay, one, to buy so much supply, but why is this even allowed by the pharmaceutical companies? Why is it important for them to ensure that rich countries that have money are able to buy so much of the vaccines that were not before even the vaccines had been proven to be effective? Xolisi also sharing that his understanding of the vaccine is that it is a preventative medication or injection which will be taken by people who don't have the virus just to prevent the spread. Now the difficult part is all the news that has been said about it. And we'll get to the news today, Xolisi, about what is so difficult or what are the complications about vaccines and why isn't it not easy just to talk about vaccines, or for countries like South Africa and other African countries, as you may have seen in the news of late, struggling to secure vaccines, and we're being told about patent laws and other restrictions that are there. Sikelela also saying that understand that vaccine is nobody will be forced to get vaccinated. I heard that some people do not trust the vaccine is safe and that there won't be any long-term effects. This is some of the problems that we are facing, Sikelela, where we see where we're really seeing that there is what scientists are calling vaccine hesitancy. So this means when people do not believe in the effective nature of vaccines. And later today, I have prepared a presentation that kind of explains the science. And this is using interviews that I've done with scientists to explain how vaccines work and why they're important and why we should actually trust them. So we'll get to that later today. And just to get back to what Mahmoud had said about pharmaceutical companies. So pharmaceutical companies are private entities, and obviously they are concerned with making a profit. And in making a profit, when they're making medicines that help people, a lot of the times what we see is that they patent, and patent is when they register, almost like if you register a trademark. So pharmaceutical companies are able to register a trademark of their medicine to say that they own the rights, the intellectual property. So they own the technology that has made it possible, or the scientists that have made it possible to make these drugs. They own the intellectual property because, as Mahmoud said, they spent the money to ensure that the research is done. It takes lots of years to get a vaccine that is considered to be safe. Scientists have actually said that it takes about an average of 10 years to develop a vaccine. And so part of that's a lot of money that is being put in to the pharmaceutical companies. But as we'll learn today, it's not just pharmaceutical companies in most cases that are putting in the money to make vaccines. It is also governments. So in many cases, you find that governments actually give money. So I'm seeing that Allison's hand is up. Sorry, Allison, I didn't see that. You can go ahead.
Thank you, Ponzo. To add on to the current, point that you're on what Mahmoud said, is I think it's all about, and please excuse me if I sound a bit cynical here, but I have a very strong feeling that this is all about, power. Everybody wants to be first. Everybody wants to be the leader, because health is a very lucrative industry, because we always need, a medical intervention, and there's this continuous, improvement of systems and products, and the pharmaceutical industry alongside, the governments and companies, especially your big companies. I think that yes, a lot of money goes into the research, but we need to also bear in mind that they are spending all that money upfront because they want to be the first, and it is a sad state of affairs, because I think we have some excellent research, bodies and organizations worldwide, and if all of these people could put their heads together, to come up with something to save humanity as a whole, it'll be so much better for all of us. But no, each one wants the biggest slice of the pie. So I think that is kind of where it's going to hurt us. We might end up seeing people who are not even qualified in the field, but they've got the money in the pockets and they've got this hunger for power. And these guys might well end up being the owners of the proper vaccine, and when I say proper, when we look at the current COVID-19 tests, and especially the rapid test that's become available, we already see the different sorts that's coming out, and and you don't know where to. I mean, we're treading uncharted territories here, and we don't know which test is more reliable. But everybody's trying to get a piece of the pie, which at the end of the day, the people will suffer, unfortunately.
That is very true. And this is what we're going to discuss in the next 2 days, that yes, we do understand, like Alison is saying, that a lot of pharmaceutical companies, the manufacturers like Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson, I'm sure these are some of the words you've been hearing when the minister speaks on the news, that, Pfizer has a vaccine, Johnson & Johnson has a vaccine, and all this information that we're hearing. But what does it mean? And there's a story that I like telling, because it's one of the stories that convinced me I wanted to be a health journalist. Like years ago, I mean, we know polio has been eradicated in the world. And that's because the doctor or the scientist who created the vaccine for polio, Jonas Salk, refused to put a patent on the polio vaccine. And when he was asked by Edward R. Murrow why, who owns the vaccine since he has not patented, he said the people, because there is no patent, would you patent the sun? And patenting is like what we're saying, like what I was explaining earlier on, it is saying that I own this, I created this, therefore it's like registering a trademark. It's saying that I own everything that has to do with producing this drug, this pill, and therefore anyone else who wants to produce this pill has to pay another pharmaceutical company or the patent register, the person who registered the patent, money to be able to use that information. And his answer was, would you patent the sun? And as we reflect, maybe even at the end of today, the first day, I want us to think about that. What does it mean for a scientist to say, would you patent the sun? Had Jonas Salk patented the polio vaccine, would we be sitting in a world where we say we've eradicated polio? And what happens while we understand that science is important and research should be done, do we understand as reporters and as people more than anything, citizens of the world and this country, the importance of ensuring that everyone has the availability of public health or a public vaccine? And what does that mean? I also just want to, learn more about the things that you do. So one of the questions I'll ask and you can write it in the chat or raise your hand or unmute. Have you been reporting on I'm sure everyone has been reporting on the vaccine, because there's no way of ignoring the pandemic. But what I'm more interested in is how have you been reporting? What are some of the stories that you've been writing during this time, or you've been thinking about writing, maybe been afraid for whatever reason, to write about the vaccine or the pandemic at large? I would say I wrote my first story on the vaccine situation last year in August. I haven't written another one. And that's because I took a break from journalism just a little bit because I was getting too stressed by COVID to be able to go out and report and interview people. So I wrote the story last year, and I'll share a link in the chat box. And this is before even, just after vaccine trials were being announced in South Africa, that we're going to have the Oxford vaccine trial. And I wrote this story, and our guest speaker, he was one of the main sources of the story, where I talk about how big pharmaceutical companies are already trying to profit over the pandemic by taking, essentially they were already selling a vaccine that was not proven to be effective or safe, right? And that is where you see kind of the pandemic, what we call pandemic profiteering, where people want to make money from this pandemic that we find ourselves. Another example of pandemic profiteering can be what happened with Dis-Chem. Remember early in the pandemic here in March, April, and May, Dis-Chem started taking the prices, doubling and even tripling the prices of masks that you could buy in their shop. And this is how we see how private sector or private companies can find ways to, profit over something that no one caused the pandemic, really, honestly. Like we're all, a global pandemic is happening, and no one is, like, we can't say Alison or Itumeleng or Lungi or Lucas is to blame for the pandemic. This is why it's a public health emergency of international concern. And so we see that private companies are trying to profit through different ways, like I said, with Dis-Chem, tripling and even quadrupling the price of masks, so that people, you and me, who need a mask, this is before cloth masks were even were even declared to be safe for use. Now we have to spend 3 or 4 times the amount of money that we would spend buying a mask. And so this is more or less the same way some pharmaceutical companies have also operated in the past. I'll share with you a graphic later today where I did, in the story that I'm telling you about, I did what you call, it is a timeline of how the fight against big pharmaceutical companies in South Africa, and that it dates back as far as during the peak of the AIDS pandemic, where civil society organizations such as the Treatment Action Campaign took the government and different pharmaceutical companies, the same ones that can produce vaccines and produce other medicine for other diseases, took them to court to force them to remove patents on HIV drugs that at the time were helping. We're talking about as late or as early as in 1999, when there was an for example, there was an antifungal drug called flucoxanol. It's owned by Pfizer. The manufacturing company is Pfizer. And at the time, it cost 15 times more to buy the drug in South Africa than it did in other places like Thailand, where it was a generic. And the reason that Pfizer could charge South Africans 15 times more for a life-saving drug at that time. So it helped when people had full-blown AIDS, it helped people treat some of the symptoms that they were having, including fungal infections. And they were selling it at 15 times the price. For one simple reason, there was a patent in South Africa against that drug that Pfizer had applied for. And it took civil society activists, people who were living with HIV at the time, to say, no, this is not right, because people were dying because they couldn't access the drugs. There are cases outside of even HIV, like for cancer medication. There's one cancer medication that is owned by another pharmaceutical company called GlaxoSmithKline, where they had the price of that medication was close to 200, like to get treatment for breast cancer. On that treatment, it costs about 250,000, R250,000. And one of the activists, and this is one of the cases that got me introduced to patent laws and how they matter for health in South Africa. Her name was Tobeka Dagi. She ended up passing away because she couldn't afford the treatment that she needed, even though she was a good candidate. Like, doctors said that this is the treatment that she would need to actually survive the breast cancer that she had. And so the reason we need to know about patent laws, about intellectual property as journalists, is that it helps us be able to inform our audiences, or the communities that we live in. You know, a lot of you were talking about how your newspapers and your radio stations don't just reach the area that you live in, they reach bigger in their bigger district municipalities where they're distributed. And sometimes when we look at that, when we look at the research that looks at where do people, ordinary people, get their information about health issues, they get it in the media. We are sometimes, it's not the Minister of Health necessarily who, like, we have to convey the messages from the minister, or from the WHO, or from any other entities to people, because when people are surveyed, there was a study that was done a couple of years ago in South Africa, when people were asked, where do you get information about your health needs and what you need to take care of? Most of the people said the media. They read about what they need to know about their health from newspapers, they listen to the radio, they watch television. Even now, there was a study that came out just late last year from the HSRC, the human, I always forget to say the acronym properly, but I'll try, I'll take it slow. It's the HRC is basically the Human Sciences Research, HSRC, the Human Sciences Research Council. Thank you so much. I always forget the acronym. It's the Human Sciences Research Council, and essentially they're one of the most reputable research agencies that we have in the country. They've done some of the biggest researches, and the information that we know about how many people have HIV in South Africa, how many people are dying of certain diseases, a lot of that research comes from the HSRC. And they did a survey with about 7,000 health workers last year in October, asking them where do they get their health information about COVID-19. And a majority of the health workers, these are nurses, these are doctors, these are people who work in clinics, these are people who are facing COVID-19 straight in the face. Guess what they said? They get their information about the latest developments on COVID-19 from the media, from us. Even people who know more about COVID-19 rely on us to know what is the latest information on COVID-19. And if I wanted to talk a little bit about that, because it just shows the importance, the role that we play in society, that a lot of the times we are the difference between life and death. And it might not feel like it because we're running and we're chasing 5 deadlines, or we're chasing another deadline, but we are really, the information that we put out there about COVID-19, about other health issues, determines how people, the people we love, the people we know, the communities we live in, the actions they will take towards their health. We influence it by how we report. And this is why it's very important that we use accurate information, that we inform ourselves, that we know more about COVID-19, we're always researching COVID-19 more than we would research anything else, because that is what is at stake. And I see Fatima has joined us, and she's going to be speaking to us. And I think I'll just open up for a few questions or comments, if there are any, before I just introduce Fatima, who can start, and she's going to be telling us the importance of intellectual property as somebody who was there, like as, for example, I was just giving an example about that this is not the first time we're talking about patent laws and patents by pharmaceutical companies and the cost, or how this costs people's lives, and it's a public health risk, or that pharmaceutical companies are able to create patents that prevent people from being able to afford medication, life-saving medication or vaccines in the case of COVID-19. Thank you so much, Mahmoud. You're saying that the profiteering that goes into the race of developing a vaccine is a very real one, and it's been happening for, like I just said, for many years. That is why IP, intellectual property rights, are claimed by pharmaceutical companies regardless of the human costs in lives and livelihoods. A point that I'd like us to bear in mind, though, is that there is something that detracts from the important focus, and that is the overwhelming prevalence of fake stories and conspiracy theories. Could you please say something about this? Definitely, there's a session later later today about separating fact from fiction, and how conspiracy theories, also part of the reason African Alliance wanted to have this workshop is because we're seeing so much conspiracy theories about vaccines that were going on social media, on WhatsApp, even sometimes unintended fake news through our colleagues who did not necessarily understand the science properly, or did not read the study or interrogate the study. And later on today, I've just prepared a few slides where I give you tips on how do you know if a study is, like, if the study is correct, and that you can quote this, and this is information that you can put into your story. But for now, I'd like to just to introduce Fatima Hassan. As I said, Fatima is an incredible person. She's a human rights lawyer and a social justice activist with lots of years of experience. She is currently the founder and head of the Health Justice Initiative, and she's been working tirelessly throughout the pandemic with other people, but as well as in her capacity as the head of the Health Justice Unit, to talk about what are some of what equitable access looks like, and what is the responsibility of our government, what is the responsibility of pharmaceutical companies and different other entities in ensuring that the vaccine, the COVID vaccine, becomes available for everyone. And with that, I'll just like to introduce Fatima, who will give a presentation, and then we'll also open it up for question and answer a little bit later, where you can ask her questions, as she's the expert, and some of the answers that I've given you already, or some of the information I've been able to give you in the past 30 minutes is because of reading some of Fatima's work, interviewing experts like her as well. So if there are many questions you have about intellectual property, you have the next hour to ask and fire away. Fatima, welcome.
Thank you, Poncho, and nice to meet everybody on the show. I do apologize if there's any background noise. We didn't know, but there's some renovations in my building, so sorry about that. I was wondering if Chiwa could please start sharing the slideshow, so we could just go through some information, and then we'll be able to have more of a discussion in Q&A. Is that okay, Poncho?
That's perfect. That's perfect, Fatima.
Great, thanks. Okay, next slide. So I think, as Poncho says, the concept of equity and the reason why we are arguing that there must be one country, one plan, so it's a hashtag, but But really the idea stems from what emerged quite early on in the pandemic, which was a global Peoples Vaccine Alliance. And so the idea behind the equitable demand, or the demand for equity for a people's vaccine, really stems from the fact that what we're arguing is that everyone everywhere, not just in South Africa, not just in New York, not just in Canada, but everywhere, particularly in our continent, who needs access to a vaccine must get a safe and effective vaccine, because ultimately the only way you can get out of this pandemic is through global population immunity, because the disease is so infectious. So it's not something like HIV/AIDS. It's a highly infectious disease, and it actually basically knows no borders. The second part to the equity argument, which is also linked to the People's Vaccine Campaign and something called the Free the Vaccine Campaign. And in South Africa today, we'll be launching our own People's Vaccine Alliance. And if you'd like to sign on to that, you can just look at the C19 website and give your own individual or organizational endorsement. So it's something that's happening around the world, and I think that that's quite important. But the idea behind that is that all diagnostic tools, and by that we mean all the COVID tests and the testing, kits, for example, all or any treatments that become available to treat COVID, because at the moment we only have some steroids. If you hospitalized, if you're ventilated, you maybe would be given dexamethasone. But other than that, there's no other proven and safe and effective treatment. And then now that we have the vaccines, which were only authorized on an emergency basis, basically a few weeks ago. So it's quite unprecedented. Within the space of 9 or 10 months, there was accelerated research into vaccines, and not just accelerated research, but also there was the approval of some vaccines in some countries. And that's when we saw the rollout starting to happen in parts of the global north. And as you know, none of the vaccines are as yet registered in South Africa, and I'll give you an update on that later. But the idea is that all diagnostic tools, so the tests, all treatments, all vaccines must be available to everyone, everywhere, free at the point of delivery. So the principle underlying equity is that in South Africa, just because you're a domestic worker, it can't mean that you wait for a vaccine and only get it after your employer if you're the same age and if you have the same health profile. And so the idea behind equity and having one plan, and that's where we are in South Africa, unless AfriForum in Solidarity in their legal case now overturns that idea, is that all medical schemes, the private health sector and government, the public health sector, will be administering the vaccine on an equitable basis, so that all healthcare workers, whether you work in Groote Schuur or Netcare, you get it at the same time. All frontline workers, all police, all teachers, whether you work in a private school or public school, you would get it at the same time. So that's really, I hope, sort of underscores why equity is important when you're dealing with a pandemic, and also mainly to avoid what we call vaccine apartheid. Because if we didn't have equity underpinning the global call for a people's vaccine, or if we didn't have equity underpinning the call in South Africa, and we've been working on this for months, and we're really, really, very, encouraged, I would say is the word, that the government has actually adopted that principle of equity. It's unprecedented. Ordinarily, you would have medical schemes taking government to court almost immediately, or the private healthcare sectors, but even they understand for their own reasons, their bottom line reasons, to open up the economy, etc., that it's important to actually have equity in the rollout of vaccines for South Africa. Next slide, please. So just to give you a quick update, and Poncho, I'm sure you'll share the slides with everybody so that people don't have to worry about writing everything down.
Yes, we will share the slides.
Thanks. So you all know that we have these 4 vaccine trials that are happening in the country. And of these, we now know, and you can verify that, but we believe that the AstraZeneca dossier, that has been confirmed by the minister, that is being fast-tracked for approval based on an expedited basis using the regulatory approvals that have happened in other countries. So the US and the EU registrations, that data will be used in South Africa to see whether we're going to confirm this. So it's very likely that we will obviously approve it, because what COVID has done is it's turned the entire world's regulatory system upside down. Normally you do research, then you get it approved, and then you procure it to bring it to the market. But with COVID, everything has happened upside down. Johnson & Johnson, as you know, there's some reports on that. We believe that in the next few days, some data will be coming out. It seems that government really wants to pursue this particular vaccine because it's a single dose. So if you only need a single dose, then you need less supplies. Whereas with the other vaccines, if you need 2 doses, then there's 2 problems with that. You have to order more supplies and you have to vaccinate people twice. So after 14 days or 21 days, you have to find them again. They have to come back and you have to give them the second dose. But watch the Johnson & Johnson because it's likely that their data is going to be coming out. In fact, there's a piece in the BMJ which shows preliminary early clinical efficacy. So it seems like the data is quite positive. But then that is on a rolling basis dossier with SAPA, and they could approve it in the next 2 weeks. So I really think the next 4 weeks are critical for vaccine access in South Africa and for securing supplies, because I think everything's going to happen on an accelerated basis in the next 4 weeks. Novavax, still too early to tell. So we'll watch that. And then Pfizer, BioNTech, we believe that, and that's the part you need to verify, that the dossier has actually just been submitted with SAPA. So it's very likely that that could also be registered quite shortly. And as you know, we can only roll out a vaccine once it's been approved by SAPA, the regulatory authority. So you all know about the COVAX debacle and the drama. I won't really go into that. But last night, the president issued a statement on behalf of the AU vaccine acquisition dossier, which talked about 200 million dosages coming in for Africa. And for the first time, African leaders have admitted what we've been saying for months, that COVAX has severe limitations and is hardly going to serve the global South populations, because it has a massive supply problem, and also not all drug companies are part of COVAX. So COVAX is actually, I don't know why some of the media were making this the big issue as if it was the only place where we could secure vaccines. We'd been saying for months, MSF had been saying for months, that COVAX has severe limitations, and that can't be the solution to South Africa's problem. So the next issue I wanted to highlight is that when we say we want a people's vaccine, it's not just because there's a pandemic and you should actually do the moral correct thing, which is to try and use scientific knowledge to actually advance patients' lives. It's also because of the pandemic and the impact it's had on the global economy, a lot of rich countries and philanthropic foundations and organizations and wealthy individuals realized what was going to happen to the world's economy and what was going to happen to the world's health systems and political systems and social relief systems. So it's basically toppled everything that people have been working on in the development space for the last sort of 15 to 20 years. And the impact is devastating, from job losses to people losing their houses. I mean, people getting sick, people dying. You all know this because you're reporting on this on the front line. So what these governments and different organizations did was they actually put the money on the table for a lot of this research to happen. So when we say that billions, not millions even, not hundreds of thousands, billions of dollars and euros have actually gone into the accelerated research of many of these companies. Some of these companies never did vaccines before in their life. It was not a market for them. But what they've done is taken the technology that was actually developed by HIV research, by Ebola researchers, by other public institutions. So these are public researchers, public knowledge, which they then bring to market. And obviously, they won't make their pricing and data public, so you can't verify it. And a lot of the discussions, what's called the bilateral, so one-on-one, the government and a private manufacturer, these discussions are either under classified as state secret in some parts of the EU. In South Africa, it's under non-disclosure agreement, what we call the NDAs, or they'll ask them for confidentiality agreements. Even COVAX has said, we can't tell you what the prices are and what the agreements are. So the situation you have is that you're accelerating research, you're procuring medicines at a price that is not transparent before you've actually registered it in secret talks. And you're doing that in COVAX, you're doing that in a bilateral, and you're doing that through the Africa Vaccine Acquisition Task Team for Africa. So there's many different pots of potential supplies, which are limited, obviously, and we'll come to the reasons why they're limited supplies right now. I think you may want to watch, because I've mentioned to you why Johnson & Johnson is so important, and government has really been talking about Johnson & Johnson. If you track all of their press statements of the last few months, it seems like that's the one they want, because obviously it's a one dose. So while all of this research was happening in the last few months and all of the different intellectual properties, protections were being secured and money was being put on the table, Johnson & Johnson enters into some secret agreement with Aspen. And Aspen Pharmacare is a South African manufacturing company, which, as you know, their main plant is in PE. And so what they do, and Aspen is part of the Solidarity Fund, Aspen is part of Business for South Africa. Aspen was sitting with the Minister of Health in the beginning of the pandemic, procuring PPE. He was actually, one of the Aspen senior officials was actually sitting in a press conference with the Minister of Health. So there's always been very close access between Aspen and the ruling party and Aspen and government. So that's one issue. But Aspen actually is considered a private pharmaceutical company, even though it likes to take the benefits of being, having state preferences for licenses. It enters into agreement with Johnson & Johnson, which the New York Times has now reported on, and some other media outlets have reported. But they give you a very confusing language, and this is the thing of you have to check the facts and you have to check properly what they're actually talking about. So they are filling and finishing the Johnson & Johnson vaccine for Johnson & Johnson, and they agree, even though their trial is being conducted in South Africa, even though in a global pandemic, that all of the first 300 million batches of that vaccine will only be for exports. So Aspen will fill and finish it here in PE and then send it to a third country to honor the rich countries who did what we called advanced market commitments or pre-purchases. So people bought up supplies of a potential vaccine, even though they didn't know whether it would be registered for use or whether it would be effective or not. So you need to watch the situation with Aspen and Johnson & Johnson. They've tried to backtrack. Aspen is saying Johnson & Johnson created the terms and conditions. They told us we can't export. Johnson & Johnson is like, well, we approached government. So there's a lot of complexities in trying to get through exactly what is going on with Aspen, Johnson & Johnson and the National Department of Health. But as things stand at the moment, they will fill and finish and they will export. And so that is an issue. The second thing that happened a few months ago, we all got excited because BioVac, which is supposed to be the manufacturer of vaccines, of safe and effective vaccines for South Africa and for the continent, which is in Cape Town, it's a state-private partnership, says, oh, we're going to make vaccines. And so we all say, well, can we have details? Which company, which vaccine, how much, what will the price be? So it turns out that through this COVAX initiative, they identified BioVac as a potential drug manufacturer, but there's been no details since. So that is another thing to look at. The CEO of BioVac is actually on the Vaccine Advisory Committee, on one of the committees. So there's a lot of involvement of all of these role players, but there's very little transparency on what are the terms and conditions, what's actually going on, what's the status quo. Because the last thing we would want is BioVac making a vaccine for COVAX, which all goes to the rich countries, nothing for South Africa, nothing for Africa, nothing for refugees, etc. But that is a bit uncertain. So sorry, I've taken a bit of time on the slide, but I thought it was important for you to understand the complexities of all of the different arrangements, and that the call for a people's vaccine actually comes from the fact that the people have actually contributed to the research through funding and also through our participation around the world, Brazil, South Africa, many other parts of the world, where ordinary people have actually participated in the vaccine research. Next slide, please. Hi, Chiwan. Can we get the next slide? Thanks.
Sorry, it's just freezing at the moment.
There we go. So some of the, some of our frustrations with the way in which some more commercial media have been reporting on this issue is that they're not disaggregating the data and the information. And what we're seeing is a lot of PR and a lot of spin, where pharmaceutical companies can shape the narrative and can shape the way in which people think about their role in this pandemic. And we have been saying for months, because of our experience with HIV or TB or cancer, because this is not out of the ordinary. This is exactly the way in which the industry operates in any epidemic or in any pandemic. The one was, we said, you've got to have more transparency, which is why we were saying government has to be more transparent, as well as all the drug companies who are part of those deals, right? And that you can never have a sustainable vaccination program for South Africa or even the rest of Africa if you're going to only rely on charity and benevolence. And we'll come to state action later. So you have to be transparent about the licensing terms and conditions, about the deals you are striking, about the prices, which right now, nobody knows what prices we're paying. There's 4 different prices around the world, different price for COVAX, different price for the EU, different price for the US, and then we all agreeing to different prices in our bilaterals. So we're getting large amounts being said, we're going to spend 150 million here, we're going to get 20 million dosages there, but nobody knows the disaggregated prices of, well, how many supplies from each drug company and what will you pay per dosage for each, because it excludes delivery, it excludes logistics, especially for the vaccines that need really cold fridges or cold storage, and it excludes actually administering it on a national basis to the whole country. So it's not just the cost of the actual vaccine vial, it's actually the cost of many different things, the entire supply chain. I've talked about all the public investment that has gone into the vaccines, which really underpins the idea of a people's vaccines. So the other thing you need to bear in mind is that what some companies will do, so Johnson & Johnson or AstraZeneca and Oxford University will say, no, but we gave a license to the Serum Institute of India. They are a generic manufacturer. They will manufacture the vaccine for all low income and some middle income countries in Africa. But that's only one license. So that's a voluntary license. Nobody forced AstraZeneca. They did it on their own. So it's called a voluntary license, right? They're limited in geographies, they're limited in respect of pricing, and they segment markets. So they still retain the intellectual property. And what we've seen with the Serum Agreement, which we've now had to establish because there was a not totally, they weren't sharing that much information, is that Oxford University gave a license to AstraZeneca. AstraZeneca has exclusive authority about who it wants to manufacture its vaccine, where, how much, what supplies, at what price, and where can people send it to. And so they gave a license to the Serum Institute of India and said, we will manufacture for the rich parts of the world and you manufacture for the lower income countries. And in India, then there was an issue of whether their government was allowing the Serum Institute to export those vaccine dosages. So similar if, for example, our government said Aspen can't export anything. And then they backtracked, which is basically the reason why the South African government is now able to potentially secure some supplies from the Serum Institute for the AstraZeneca vaccine. And the conjecture there is that Cyril Ramaphosa basically called the Prime Minister of India and said, you've got to give us at least a few million dosages. You can't have a ban on exports, because if Serum Institute is unable to provide you with the vaccine of that particular vaccine, then nobody can. And so when AstraZeneca says that we're not allowed to sell to South Africa, not exactly accurate or true, because they were the ones who actually created that market segmentation with the Serum Institute. I've talked about the limitations of COVAX. I've talked about all the pre-purchase agreements and what we call the advanced market commitments. So now the issue comes to, and I'm sure Poncho explained to you, that we're not powerless. All countries in Africa could actually take state action to address this issue, and we could have done it months ago. So there's a few issues that you need to understand here, that while in theory we have the right to actually take state action, what is called the TRIPS flexibilities, and that was really the battle that we fought around HIV/AIDS medicines, which is called the Doha Declaration. That's the TRIPS flexibilities, which means in a public health emergency, in a public health crisis, if a manufacturer cannot meet supplies, any country in the world that's a member of the WTO can actually sorry, just this like messaging going on here in videos, and I'm just getting distracted. Sorry, I've just switched that off. So basically it means that you could take state action to compel those companies to allow other people to manufacture it where there's manufacturing capacity, or you could put in price controls, etc. But nobody has been able to do that in this pandemic because of the, I would say, because of the undue influence of the pharmaceutical industry. And so what's quite, you know, odd and I think concerning is that our government has been willing to take on the tobacco industry and the alcohol industry, but not necessarily the pharmaceutical industry. And there's multiple things happening on that score. The one is that government has finally agreed that we need to fix our patent laws. And it's currently sitting in Parliament. And so really questions have to be asked to Parliament that you had a whole year, the whole of 2020 in a pandemic, and you still didn't pass the law. If you don't pass it now, then what is the point of having these amended patent laws? Because we can't even use the law then to help us in this particular pandemic. And the second thing that's happening is obviously the TRIPS waiver request, which the president never mentions. Nobody's given us a briefing on. We're having to follow developments of the South African government and the Indian government, where they are leading a call for a temporary waiver of all the trade rules related to the COVID-19 pandemic on a temporary basis. And, you know, obviously there are richer countries who are opposing the waiver totally, even though they've started their vaccination programs. And obviously the drug companies are not pleased with that particular waiver request. There's some concerns around whether we were being punished by not being able to secure supplies because we had actually been pushing for that waiver. And so that's why I really think the president has to take us in his confidence about the DTIC-led waiver request in Geneva. Can I get the next slide, please, Chua? So yeah, we're coming to the final slide. So we had obviously been calling for an equitable plan for access and allocation in South Africa since, you know, for a few months, and then we started formal correspondence, even threatening legal action from November already. And our main concern, and that's where we come to the vaccine apartheid issue and equity, and really is at the heart of, you know, the strategy that government has presented, and granted there's a lot of details that are missing. And that is that in South Africa, we still have a two-tiered healthcare system. And if we had allowed the two-tiered healthcare system to each have its own plan, to each have its own procurement, to each have its own distribution, then we definitely, given how our country has dealt with HIV, with TB, with cancer, we would have had two plans for one country, and there wouldn't have been equity in allocation and access. And so really the demands from civil society is that the geography has to be really considered. It has to be everyone, everywhere. We certainly don't want exclusions that we get that vaccine, but Zimbabwe doesn't. Or Zimbabwe and South Africa gets the vaccine, but Uganda doesn't. Well, Canada gets it, but nobody else in Africa. I've talked about transparency before. I've talked about the countries that are opposing the TRIPS waivers. And so really at the heart of this is, what questions do we ask drug companies, especially the ones who are doing clinical trials? Because remember, while they were doing the clinical trials here, nobody forced them to make sure that when the trial is concluded, and if the vaccine for that trial was successful, that people in South Africa would actually access it. So that's what we call post-trial access. There are questions right now with AstraZeneca coming, you know, getting registered, potentially Johnson & Johnson, as well as the Pfizer vaccine, is what about the participants? A lot of them were ordinary people in our communities. It wasn't just the celebrities who were participating. Will those people be able to access the vaccine for free and immediately because they participated in the clinical research? And that's what we call, will you unblind the trial? The people who got a placebo, will they now get a vaccine? What's going to happen there? Because if you don't have integrity in that clinical research system and don't guarantee post-trial access, the next time you have a pandemic and you ask people to participate in a research or clinical trial, people will actually refuse, and that creates, that slows down scientific progress. And we were told that we're participating in these trials basically because we would be at the front of the queue to guarantee access, but that has not panned out. And so the ethics approvals, the universities that were involved in these trials, they all need to make sure that in future, whatever trials we're doing in South Africa has to guarantee as a minimum post-trial access for all communities. And so finally, the call is given all of this and everything that I've explained to you, is that's what we mean by it's got to be treated as a global public good. So from what we've seen in the last 2 weeks and the way government has responded, it's partially being treated as a public good by bringing on medical schemes in the private healthcare sector and having one plan. In that way it is, but it's still not being treated as a public good in relation to the negotiations with drug companies and the pharmaceutical industry. It's like almost like it's a PlayStation or an iPhone and you're trying to, get a good deal. And that isn't how it should be, because medicines are not a luxury. They're not an iPhone, they're not a car, they're not a laptop. They're actually a life-saving intervention. And given what is happening to our country right now, what healthcare workers are telling us on the front line, that our public health system and private healthcare system as well are severely at strain. People are getting sick, people are dying. There really is no time for, quite nice diplomacy. We really have to be putting pressure on all role players, including the drug companies. Next slide, please. So this slide just gives you some links which you could do further reading. It's really helpful because it also shows that this issue of limited supplies and having to take action was already raised months ago and quite early on in 2020. It also gives you the links to our own government submission on the intellectual property barriers to accessing life-saving medicines and interventions from July 2020 already. So why government is not talking about this, having briefings on this, just seems to me like an own goal, because this is something that the global South is acknowledging them for and saying this is our one potential hope for access. But here we don't talk about it because we don't, I don't know, it seems like we don't want to antagonize the pharmaceutical industry. And so that's it. So Chiwa, could you put the contact details up? And if you need to reach us or you'd like us to explain anything further, you can contact me or Althea or Marlies, who's joining us in a few days. And yeah, we'll be happy to help you or take any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Fatima, for that presentation. So informative. There were things that I thought I knew, but you going through them again really made them clear again. So there's already a few questions in the chat. I'll just read them out. Notando is asking, is based on COVID. Last year, we were told that COVID-19 kills more people in winter, meaning we should expect more deaths in winter than summer. But now we're already in 2021 and it's summertime. The rate or the number of people dying is shocking. What confuses me is that people are dying more in summer and families that deceased are giving negative COVID results after the person is long buried. Is the Department of Health lying to us about the real statistics? All the people declared dead, is it because of COVID-19 or is government getting money to lie about the statistics? I think, and Fatima, you can join. So it was proven to be not true that it spreads more in winter and cold months. Remember, Notando and everyone, the most important thing that we need to remember about COVID-19 is that this is a new disease. And people, even scientists, the top scientists in the world, don't really know everything. And every day there's new information about the virus, how it interacts in our bodies, how it, is transmitted, and all that comes up. So sometimes there were in the early stages, there were talks about it being in the summertime, it might not work fast in the heat, but this has been proven to be incorrect. And therefore, what we're seeing now, the statistics are showing us that when we are in public, when we are gathering, when we're not wearing masks, when we're not practicing sanitation, hand washing, and all what the government always calls the non-pharmaceutical interventions, as they always say in the press releases. This is what science is also showing, that increases the number of cases and the number of deaths. So I think, and Fatima, you can come in here. The statistics we're getting from government, they're going to the World Health Organization, to the Africa CDC. So government could not lie about them because the ramifications or the consequences of lying about this would be too high. Fatima, is there anything else regarding, because I think, the lack of trust between the people of South Africa towards their government, because of the history of corruption and everything that has happened in this country, makes it sometimes very hard to believe. But when it comes to the statistics, I know it's not necessarily related to the equitable access, but I think this is where it starts before people even believe in the vaccine and everything. Do you have any thoughts to share on that?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously I'm not a epidemiologist and statistician, but what you could do is follow the People's Health Movement, who are trying to make sense of the data. And what's important is that because it's such a fast moving pandemic, sometimes there are delays in collecting statistics and data. What we do know from this week is that the MRC released a report on comparing deaths that for the same period before COVID, and then deaths for the same period during COVID. And what we're definitely seeing is an excess amount of deaths for what you would have normally expected for the number of deaths in South Africa. So despite the lockdowns and despite the alcohol ban, we definitely have an increase in the number of people dying in South Africa, not just from COVID, but also from non-COVID related conditions. Because you must remember that if you have a chronic condition, and say, for example, you're very sick with another chronic condition and you can't access a hospital bed or you can't access treatment because of the strain that's currently happening with the health system, and that also could contribute to a higher death number.
Thank you. And I will also just share the link to the study that Fatima just referred to right now by the South African Medical Research Council. I'll share it now. Another question from Lungi Fatima says that most people have interacted with focus on the money that was donated to the Solidarity Fund, and they say they don't understand why the government took so long to start negotiating to acquire a vaccine. Is it all about the money?
So, yeah, Chiba, could you take the slide off, please? Because I don't know where I am now. Thank you. Thank you, Chiba. So I think it's about the money, but it's also about planning, and it's also about limited supplies. And I think there are questions to be asked about the role of the Solidarity Fund, which is basically a private fund which has PBO status. And we certainly can't expect the Solidarity Fund to act as a parallel health department. This pandemic should have been the opportunity to strengthen our public health system and to strengthen the ability of government to respond to a pandemic. So there are some really worrying trends that are emerging around the fact that if you look at the MAC advisories, and I would urge you to read our commentary on government's presentation of its strategy on our website, and we try and set out what we think has happened based on the information that's given to us. Because remember, we can only rely on facts, right? So the MAC actually did do several advisories, which only now have been made public from September already and then December. And it says to government, go negotiate in a bilateral way, go negotiate with COVAX, go negotiate with whoever you can, because we're going to have limited supplies. And the MAC says to them, go and look at a mixed funding model because you need to get all role players on board. And it says to them on COVAX and the National Treasury, you need to do due diligence. There are concerns about limited supplies, and there are concerns that you could forfeit a small 20% of your down payment if there's no vaccine that comes to it or no vaccine that's successful, because remember, everybody was hedging their bets on whether COVAX, one of the vaccines, would actually work. And so I think the way we see it, or the way we interpret it, is that this all goes to National Treasury, and something happens. It's a very, I think, disingenuous and a very bizarre explanation from the Minister of Health. I think he's just trying to protect the integrity of cabinet, where he said, no, the National Treasury didn't want to have a deviation. Now they're on board. National Treasury will fund in 2021. We had to quickly ask the Solidarity Fund for money. Now that is a concern in a constitutional democratic state, that your own National Treasury can't come up with the money. The contract was received on the 15th of September. Payment was made in late December. There was no deadline missed, and I think that is that is also something that is not accurate, because COVAX keeps changing its own internal rules and its own deadlines. And we have major issues with COVAX, and the latest report on COVAX that it's likely to fail. And last night, like I said, the AU has said that we can't rely on COVAX. It's a weak structure. And it's the first time they've publicly said that. And we've been saying that for months. So something is clearly going on around why the Department of Health had to go quickly, I think, beg the Solidarity Fund for the down payment. And the Solidarity Fund, one must remember, is not just the billionaires' money. People were asked to give their salaries. You know, domestic workers maybe making a 50 Rand contribution to that fund. There was 150 million Rand of public money that was the seed capital, which was given by the president into the Solidarity Fund. So just having the Solidarity Fund to do food parcels, to do PPE, which they are doing, I think has been a distraction from why was it set up? Why did the president set up the Solidarity Fund? Does he think that our government is incapable of delivering those very services? And the fact that at the end of the year, they had to step in with this down payment, to me says that there's a lot of stories there which need to be unpacked. And we still haven't had a briefing from the National Minister of Finance and National Treasury. There's one official on the vaccine acquisition task team. It's not the DG, it's not the minister. The Minister of Finance also sits on the board of the Solidarity Fund with the Minister of Trade and Industry and Competition, not the Minister of Health. So a lot of these things really have to be, I think, unpacked a bit more. But I don't think I've answered the question, sorry. Or maybe I have, I don't know. So I suppose the answer to that question from Tsidiso basically is that, no, sorry, it was from Lungi, that the Solidarity Fund can't be the ones that's negotiating for us because we can't hold it to account. It's given a few briefings to Parliament, but it's certainly set up as a private fund with Old Mutual administering it. And I mean, I don't think there's any community people on that board. And so there's issues around the accountability system for it's not even being overseen by the Auditor General. We're arguing it's a quasi-public fund. The Auditor General should have oversight over the billions and billions of money that's actually going into the Solidarity Fund. So that's another issue. So why did government take so long to get its act together and acquire vaccines? $1 million question. I mean, we were telling them from March, we were telling them from June, we were writing to them already in November. We were like, you're going to have scarcity, already reports of global shortages. You don't have the IP laws in place. You don't have the medicine pricing regime in place. Are you going to take state action? What are you doing? What are your plans? Silence. It was only when the Daily Maverick reported that we had asked this, then they phoned and said, okay, we acknowledge your correspondence. We still don't have a formal written response. So, you know, it was civil society and the media, I believe, that really pushed it. And the last push was the scientists and clinicians saying, we don't have a plan. And that's when we saw the presentation and then the quick scurrying to try and get deals. And my own sense is that the presidency actually stepped in. And I think this is what happens about pandemic readiness. When you think the Solidarity Fund is like there to sort things out, and you don't realize that you need a task team in government of all different departments, and you only make this an issue about acquiring, procuring, sorting out prices, rolling it out, as well as PPE, as well as the hospitals, all in the Department of Health, then you have a problem. So my question actually is, what was the National Command Council doing? By law, during this disaster, the duty to develop a vaccine rollout plan and acquire the vaccines and have all of the things set out was, and that's who we wrote to. We said the Disaster Management Center, COGTA and Department of Health are responsible, but the National Command Council has to take responsibility, I think. I'm the first one to criticize the Department of Health, but I think in this particular issue, it's actually all of them who has to, and the president can't, I don't think in this kind of pandemic situation, the presidency comes in at the late end and say, okay, now we're stepping in. They should have stepped in from the beginning. Like, were they not doing mapping? Were they not doing scenario planning? Did they not look at who in Africa and South Africa can actually manufacture the vaccines so that if we win the battle, that technology transfer, that you would have plants that could rapidly scale up? So, you know, there is such a global crisis going on. 200 million dosages for Africa is like, amongst all of the states in Africa, is just the beginning. So we need to urgently ramp up global manufacturing capacity. We need to get the extra dosages that people who are very wealthy bought up before we could. Yeah, and we've got to find a way to get over the distrust and to get over this real legitimate, I think, concern that the Department of Health needs a lot of support and capacity. And so one day somebody's going to have to do an assessment of the Department of Health the way it's currently configured. Sorry for the long answer.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for that, Fatima. You know, you mentioned so many points around, it's not just, you know, I like what you're saying, and this is something I heard you say in another interview. It's not just the government that also needs to be held accountable. It's also the pharmaceutical companies that are pricing, and it's a discussion we're having earlier on when we were starting the session, talking about what we already know about patents and intellectual property. And perhaps if I get to the next question, talking about how the pandemic profiteering, as you'd like to say, and how it works, and how as journalists also we need to hold the pharmaceutical companies accountable as much as we're holding government accountable.
Yeah, so I mean, a few issues about profiteering is that obviously we as activists have always said that this is an industry that is underpinned by a profiteering motive. They have said in interviews they are not the Red Cross, they are not there for humanitarian purposes. We have always said that medicines must be regarded as a public good. It can't be treated in the intellectual property regime, like I said, as an iPhone, right? Or something that's a luxury good. And that's the key call of the MSF Access campaign and the Fix the Patent Laws campaign. So the problem is that what's allowed to happen in the world, and particularly because a lot of these companies are actually based in the US and in the EU, it's this free market idea that even medicines get to have monopolies, and even medicines get to allow the company that has brought it to market to exercise a 20-year monopoly, in some cases 30 years, 40 years. It's what we call evergreening. And by virtue of the fact that you are the only supplier and you have the monopoly on this particular vaccine or on this particular medicine or a particular diagnostic test, you can then set the price. You don't have to be transparent. You can say it's a trade secret. You don't have to share the technology. You can say it's your invention or a trade secret as well, or it's copyrighted. So you use all the different tricks or tools in the IP toolbox, right? And they have armies of lawyers who are advising them on this and doing it. So what we said early on to government is you're going to be outsmarted. We've been here before. This bunch of you and I did an interview for the Mail and Guardian where I said exactly this months ago, where we said you are going to be outsmarted.
Yes,
you
said this in last year.
Yeah, we said you're going to be out-negotiated, you're going to be outsmarted, do this, X, Y, Z, da, da, da. We've been here before. You cannot rely on charity and PR. It's the exact same thing happened. It's like you didn't need a magic crystal ball to figure out we're going to be in this situation in January, and that's the part that really enrages me. I mean, we know how the industry operates, and we're giving them too much credit, and we're too deferential to their PR statements. On the one hand, they say we have an NDA, we can't tell you anything, and the next minute they issue a PR statement. Then they have 4 different prices for the same vaccine. Somebody's asked the question, will we get the same vaccine? So you get the same vaccine. If you transfer technology of the AstraZeneca vaccine, nobody else can make a different version of it. It has to be bioequivalent. There's strict regulatory approvals. And the one good thing we have in South Africa is we have a very strict regulatory approval system. They're not going to approve something that is not safe, that is not effective, that is not bioequivalent. And I mean, when communities ask you that, just tell them, remember that you're getting ARVs from generic companies. They are as good as the brand name. They are safe and effective. If SAPA approves something, then we shouldn't be worried. But the question is, each vaccine, there's over 200 vaccines being researched in the world at the moment. As of December, it was 243. 42 are in different human clinical trials. We only, at the moment, talking about 3, right? So it's not like ARVs where it's limited companies and limited vaccines. You could potentially use different vaccines. This is how we're trying to meet the demand on the limited supplies. We're going to use Pfizer, we're going to use AstraZeneca, we're going to use Johnson & Johnson. We're going to use whoever, if the Chinese data is good, if the Russian data is good, whoever's data is good and who has good clinical trials and who are safe and effective, people are going to use that. The Middle East started vaccination programs over Christmas because they're using the Chinese vaccine, because the Russians and Chinese stepped in and said, we'll give you the vaccine, right? Some were doing it without data, some were doing it with limited data. So So it's also quite a complex thing of you're now negotiating with multiple companies, you're negotiating with COVAX, you're negotiating with Avant. But we said that there's a profit motive that underpins this industry always. We see it with cancer, we see it with TB, we see it with HIV. And if you don't address this in COVID, we'll never, ever address it with any other disease. Because this is like unprecedented in 100 years' time. And if you are not willing to take on the drug industry in this pandemic, then you can kiss it goodbye the fact that we'll get price transparency on cancer medicines. So if you have cancer in the private sector, you'll pay a hell of a lot more for the same medicines than you would if you're in the public sector. In the private sector, you could get medicines that would save your life if you had money, because the public sector can't afford those cancer medicines, right? And we've never taken action against these drug companies. So there is a concern that were we being punished by these drug companies because our government was pushing the TRIPS waiver request? Maybe, maybe not, because no drug company is going to tell you, yeah, we had our eye on you. But we were punished by the Clinton administration. And this is the irony of people going on about Nkosazana Zuma, but she was the one minister in the Mandela administration that actually took on the pharmaceutical industry. You all remember the history of the PMA case. Poncho's done that great timeline in that article about the battle against pharma for like over 25 years. And so what happens? They take the Mandela administration to court. They don't want us, because of the intellectual property protections, to be able to have easier access to affordable life-saving interventions. They then withdraw the case. We think a deal is struck, and then our government leaves them for the next 20 years. And we think that's the reason why they actually withdrew the case. And so still today, excess deaths, crisis in the health system, we're in a pandemic, we don't have supply, and we're still saying to drug companies, okay, we'll take your vaccine when it's available, please give it to us and we'll pay whatever price you want. I mean, who's advising government? I don't understand. And this is the problem about the Solidarity Fund and business and the medical schemes. It's great that they're all on board. We've never had this. They always take our government to court. We've always had to take them to court. I mean, this is medical schemes who didn't want to give people living with HIV ARVs unless you were raped or unless you had a needle stick injury. I mean, there's a history here to these schemes and to the private healthcare sector, right? So for the fact that they've come on board, significant. I know who negotiated that. That's brilliant, right? And of course, every forum in Solidarity now wants to undo that, and we will intervene in that case if we have to. But you could have taken more action. You could have been more unequivocal in South Africa, not in Geneva. Geneva negotiations, while important, are not going to help us here in Kailicha or here in Tembisa. I mean, if you see what is happening, and if you see what is happening also to people's ability to earn an income, it makes no sense whatsoever to say, well, we can't tell you, nation, because we have NDAs, and we can't tell you the prices because we have NDAs. I mean, that's just bizarre. And it's not just in South Africa. In the EU, the negotiations are classified state secret. The only reason we know the prices that are being paid in the EU for these vaccines, and Poncho, I can share it with you afterwards, was by mistake, a Belgian minister in Belgium tweeted out the list of prices they were paying for these vaccines in the EU. And then the US realized they were paying more. So here's the trick when you have a PR company, is you say, I'm offering a vaccine to South Africa at half the price of the US, and everybody thinks, yay, great. But it's actually double the price of what the EU is paying. So why don't you give us half the price of the EU price? Why don't you tell us what the COVAX price is? Why don't you tell us what the Avant price is? So yeah, that's my view on the industry.
Thank you so much, Fatima. There's a question from Lucas also that I think, feeds into, especially when we're talking about inequalities. It says, will the rising levels of inequalities in South Africa, with the rising levels, rather, of inequality in South Africa, will the vaccine be equally accessed by both working class and the rich? We've seen on social media, people asking their medical aids, demanding that asking even if they can purchase the vaccine privately, directly from pharmaceutical companies. And this is another level of equitable access, right? That's not the bigger picture. So can you please just speak to that as well, about what does it mean? Let's say everything goes well, everything goes smoothly, we have enough doses in the country to vaccinate as many people as we need to. Will whether you have a medical aid, will whether you are rich, poor, have an influence in whether you get the vaccine?
So luckily not, because we fought for this for months and we kept on saying one country, one plan. In this pandemic, we didn't want what happened with ARVs, because the HIV struggle actually set a lot of the roadmap for us and how we were supposed to deal with this. And like I said, it's significant that the medical schemes have agreed. They've passed it as a prescribed minimum benefit. They're using their reserves. They've set aside funds. The private health sector are also on board. And so this is the one time where I'm actually saying thank you to the private sector, because you are not opposing an effort to actually achieve equity. And I'm glad that tweet went out by Zelda, because it showed what people were thinking. And the backlash against that is, I think, what really convinced the medical schemes that they can't do their own thing. And so that's why I'm quite surprised at the Solidarity AfriForum case, where they are arguing that the private health sector should be able to procure directly and do their own thing. Because you must remember there's two things that people are not really reporting on the medical schemes, because we don't know the financing model and the Minister of Finance is not being transparent. I really feel like government always scores these own goals. If they were just transparent, we would probably have a different narrative right now. But the important thing is that if the state is procuring with all these different suppliers, COVAX, Avat, getting all of this, and getting it at a price that is for the state, that price benefit or price reduction is actually being passed on to medical scheme members or people who are wealthy. And remember, they are also teachers, policemen and women, and all state workers belong to GEMS and Paul Med, and obviously MPs belong to Parliament. So it's not just the rich who belong to medical schemes. There are also low-income medical schemes, and I think it's not just Discovery, for example, that we're talking about when we say medical schemes are contributing and providing social solidarity. And so it seems at the moment they're going to cross-subsidize. But our argument is, well, you actually don't know if you cross-subsidizing the state or whether the state is cross-subsidizing you, because you're actually getting the price reductions. But I think that's kind of like a red herring kind of story. The issue is, the finance model. So I'm really glad that they've all agreed that there won't be that medical scheme apartheid, because we saw that with ARVs. And we certainly wouldn't want that situation. And if they don't implement it in the way that they say they have, that all healthcare workers first, so doesn't matter whether you're from Kurtuskir or whether you're from Netcare, and that there's no discrimination across public and private in each of the priority group rollouts or the 3 different phase outs. And if you look at the MAC advisory of 15th December, it has an Annex 8, 6 pages. It gives you all of the details. It's very important to read. Then obviously we won't have these issues, but it requires obviously, health groups, civil society and the media like you to be on the front line, to be reporting when this vaccination starts out and track it and definitely monitor it as well.
Thank you. And I think another thing that's important for us to remember is, and I see a question, Tidiso's question kind of hints to that, is that, Fatima, this is very complicated legalese and global policies, and for community reporters and community journalists to make the ordinary person, South African at home, understand the importance of this. What, from you as an expert, like I know you're not a media expert, but you have the knowledge that needs to be disseminated to ordinary people. What is some of the advice you can give us on how do we do that at a community level or the community media level? Because yes, they can get the big overarching stories on like national radio and national TV, but when it comes to like Tisa saying, is that in my community, people don't even trust the vaccine. So there's like, it's almost like people are one level lower, or some people have been left completely behind in that conversation. So how do we tell people they need to care about the vaccine, how it's procured in that context?
Good question. And I'm not a media or a comms expert, so whatever I say, you can just take with a pinch of salt. But what we're seeing on social media is very worrying. There's a lot of false information, very clickbait. People want to get stories out, so then they don't check. And then we having to spend every day trying to correct the information and the narrative as well. So that is a worry. But I think what's happening is that there's so much of panic and fear because people are really getting sick and dying, and it's now coming home. It's coming into every one of you probably on this call have had somebody who's gotten sick or who's died in the last few months. It's coming into communities, and that alone, I think, makes people alert to the fact that this is not some fake thing. It actually is happening, and this is why we need the vaccine. So that's the first issue, is that the talking about it and the openness around how many people, who are these people that have died? Who are these 40,000 people that have, who are these 65,000 excess deaths? Let's just aggregate which provinces, what, you know, how has this really affected the ability of women to look after like single, you know, headed households, for example, because it's creating, remember at the time of the HIV crisis, we had HIV grandmothers and gogos. So who's looking after, if a breadwinner or a caregiver dies, what is happening? I mean, you saw the queues outside SASSA, right? Yeah, I mean, totally breaks your heart. That tells you, I think, what's going on. So community radio in multiple, you know, we keep saying community radio in all official languages has to be the way, because we can't do door to door. The social distancing and the lockdown and the restrictions has made it very difficult to do the work we did in HIV/AIDS, what we call treatment literacy. So you may think infographics in different languages are pointless, but even if 10 people read it, it's important because they will influence another 10 and those 10 will influence another 10. The WhatsApp messages in different groups, in different languages are important. The radio shows, the podcasts, some of the print media that a lot of people use, and I think really trying to focus on community news and community media. Those stories are important, and I think providing accurate information with a lens of, imagine you saying this to somebody in a treatment literacy workshop, right? Because it's true, we can't educate everybody on Zoom. Not everybody has data, not everybody has a laptop, not everybody has technology. So it really is about WhatsApp notes. Everybody has WhatsApp, SMS notes, right? And using community radio. People actually do watch SABC TV. So, you know, whatever your views are about the public broadcaster or ENCA or Newsroom Africa, I think we have to leverage those platforms. But unfortunately, a lot of that content is also in English. And so I think that's where the role of community media is, to take what you are saying in one or two, you know, main languages, and then also taking that into communities in other languages. Because right now, I'll give you an example. My mother is high risk, 74, 75. She can't leave the house. She doesn't have Zoom and Wi-Fi and internet. So she listens to the radio, 702 and SAFM. That's where she gets the information. And she watches the news on TV. And I think a lot of people in high risk or people with comorbidities, they're staying at home because there's this fear. If you go out, you're going to get sick, you're going to die, you know, and so that's why I think that is important. And it's a good question, Poncho, because one of the advisories to government already in December was, you need a broad communication strategy that includes all rail players, and please bring in civil society. So, you know, we really need to see the faith groups doing the pamphlets and information like they did about the lockdown. So if the arch and the priest and the bishop and the imam and the rabbi are all saying these things also in their virtual church gatherings, in their church groups on WhatsApp, in the actual places of worship, because some of them are congregating at the moment, even if in small groups, that's another key audience. I mean, I see in my own community, in the Muslim community, people spreading messages that's totally false and it's disinformation, right? That your DNA is going to be altered if you take the vaccine. And these are people who are middle-class professionals, right? So I think also we have to like do a massive communication strategy in the whole country. We've never done a national mass vaccination program, I think, in over 56 years. The last time was polio. So not an easy task, and I don't think we should, you know, just depend on the Department of Health. And I don't know what your views as expert communicators, but I feel GCIS is not doing a great job, and a lot of questions have to be asked to them as well.
No, definitely. Thank you so much, Fatima. Fatima's details will be shared with, as we share the presentation, we will also share Fatima's details if you have any follow-up questions. She's a very busy person. So we just, from African Alliance, from everyone in attendance, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. We really do appreciate it. And I'm sure there's many other questions that will come to you in the next few days from the participants. So thank you so much, Fatima.
Sure. Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye. And I think with that, you know, we can just take just a body break as we do the last hour of our of the workshop. And this is where I saw Zizo, I saw your question and some of the other questions that the reason I didn't pose to Fatima is that the presentation that I'll be giving after the break will kind of put them into perspective and answer, as well as Mahmoud's question around combating the conspiracy theories and the fake news. And I think one of the most important thing that we need to remember is that we need to believe the science, and we need to, and we don't believe it with our, like, just with our naivety, like, oh, a scientist said this. We need to also be journalists and ask ourselves, is this a reputable scientist? If they say they came from this institution, is this institution something that's recognized, quoted by the government and stuff like that? As we go on break, I just want us to think about, I don't know if you know it, and I hope somebody saw it. A couple of weeks ago in late December, ENCA had a expert on the show who purported to be from some institute, only to find out that he's not a scientist. The institute he's from is not a scientific institute. And they aired this interview. They had to retract it later on. But the information was already there. Imagine the person, like what Fatima was saying, Fatima's mother, who watched that insert, but didn't watch the next day for when they corrected themselves and said this was false and everything. Somebody has run with the wrong information. And that is literally the influence that we have. Yes, you can print a correction next week, or you can correct your information on air the next day or later in the day, but you might have someone who listened to you at that moment, and that is the information they got. So I just put in a 10-minute break so we can use the bathroom, walk around, grab a glass of water. Please, I urge you not to log off. I think you can just, like what I usually do is just switch off my camera and mute myself, and we'll be back at 11:40 for our last session of the day. Thank you so much for being interactive and asking so many questions. It's really lively to see that, and see you in 10 minutes.
Okay? 1.6. Bye, Matali. Yeah, okay, 3.6. I'm
Welcome back, everyone. I see most of everyone is here, which is great. And with that said, we're still recording. That's great. Just making sure everything's in order. And I hope you guys stretched a little, because sitting down for a few hours can be very detrimental to your health. Since we're learning about health today, it's an important one too. So like I said, I'm just gonna start my presentation, and then we will discuss and then wrap up a little bit later, just after 12, after this presentation. So this is just really to give more tips on how to find reputable sources. Seeing also some of the questions that were asked is that, how do we inform our communities that the vaccine is safe? There's a lot of vaccine hesitancy that's going around, and a lot of people don't trust. So I do a daily slot on Motsweding. It's about 5 minutes where I give an update. Motsweding FM is a Setswana radio, SABC radio station. And I give a COVID update every morning. And on Monday, the producers then decided to ask, or the radio station decided to ask what people believe and don't believe about COVID. And it was so scary that some of the listeners who called in, who sent in WhatsApp voice notes, were saying that they don't even believe that the virus is real. You know, like people were saying that. And what I liked is that the radio station had created a non-judgmental space to see. And what it did for us is, when we had the meeting with some of the producers afterwards, is like, we need to do, as journalists, as media practitioners, we need to do much more to inform our readers, our listeners, our viewers, because clearly there is a disconnect in some cases, and it's not necessarily a good, or like, it's not necessarily a good thing, but we realize that this is the gap, and part of having this workshop is that. So I hope some of the information that I'll be sharing in this presentation kind of help with that. And I think where I'd like to start, is by like talking about fact and fiction. There are reputable sources that we can look at, that we can listen to, we can quote in our stories, and they're just simply people we can't. The example that I gave about ENCA, I tried to look for the video while we were offline, but I think they've just completely removed it, where they got it wrong, and so it's so important for us to use, when we're reporting on COVID-19 or the vaccines, that we do it in a responsible way that is based on reputable and evidence-based research. Reputable research is that it's research from organizations such as the South African Medical Research Council, from the Department of Health. And this does not mean that we do not scrutinize the data, we do not look at it and ask questions. However, we also see that it's evidence-based. And by evidence-based, we mean that there is evidence for what the information or the source is claiming, right? So for instance, if like the question that Petronella posed earlier on, but these deaths, these many deaths that we're having every day, this is why the South African Medical Research Council then went to compare deaths between this period and the period of last year before the pandemic. And we see that we have 55,000 excess deaths. That is a statistic that can be proven because they looked at their records from last year in the same time space and the previous year in the same time space to compare. And the only thing that changed in that time space was what? The fact that we have COVID now. And this is important for us to continuously do, for us to ask questions and whether or not the sources that we are using as journalists are reputable and we can use them to inform our readers, our listeners. It's also important that we don't, like to know that what happens when we don't report responsibly. We can misinform the public, which can be a matter of life and death. I always give this example because when I first heard about it, I felt it was so ridiculous. So now we live in an era where anti-vaxxers, people who don't believe in vaccines, they're everywhere now. But I would just like to tell you a short story of how this actually started. it started in the early 2000s. I think, if I remember correctly, in 2003, the Lancet Journal is one of the most reputable scientific journals in the world. They publish the most, the most, like some of the world-changing scientific research that happens in the world. And they published a study that found, the scientists who did the study said that there is a direct link between vaccinating your children, and especially it was one specific vaccine called the MMR vaccine. It was the vaccine against mumps, measles, and rubella, right? That children get, has a direct link to a child becoming autistic. This was published, it was reported worldwide. The Guardian newspaper in the UK was one of the first ones to report on it. And then turns out that there was a mistake when the people who published, the Lancet publishers, looked at the research closely. There were many loopholes in it. The scientists did not do the research in what is called rigorous scientific measures. So there were essentially, this research itself was not done wrong. And the Lancet that published the study then issued an apologies and retracted it, but it was too late. And now, almost 20 years later, where before, even when researchers look at when people started not really believing in vaccines, you track it back to that story. And that's very dangerous. There's also a local story that happened when I did my master's. I did my master's in health journalism. And when I was doing my research, I found out that also in 2006, if I remember correctly, a story in one of South Africa's leading newspapers was published saying that children fell sick from getting a vaccine. And turns out, after the Department of Health did their research and they researched what had happened, it turns out that this was not true. And what happened was that now there were people who had, not vaccinated their own children and things like that based on false information. And so when I say that if we don't report and do our jobs responsibly, it is a matter of life and death. It's not, I'm not being dramatic or over-exaggerating. It literally is. And veteran health journalist Gary Schwitzer says that the media have to report that at this point, there are undoubtedly far more questions than answers about any vaccine candidates. He said this last year around October. Please do not report with certainty where certainty simply does not exist. And this is probably one of the hardest things, that as journalists, sometimes we don't have the answers. And sometimes we're not given the answers by experts. And we'd rather not report than report information that we don't know if it's reputable or evidence-based. And this is the thing about vaccine science, right? Like, for example, some people have been asking, why has Russia been able to guarantee a vaccine? As Fatima was saying, that you need to find out the vaccine that Russia or China or any other country has purchased. Is that vaccine, has it gone through clinical trials? Has it been shown to be safe? Many countries bought vaccines without knowing this because they have the money, or they're just trying whatever they think they can to ensure that ensure that they have a vaccine. So these are some of the issues that we have to ask ourselves when we're reporting. Do we know for sure whether or not something, particularly about vaccines, a vaccine candidate, does it work? Has it been approved? Who has approved it? If it's been approved, so we have to explain to our readers, our audiences, that yes, this vaccine has been approved. We can say these are the 5 vaccines. Like currently in South Africa, only one of the vaccines, viable vaccines, have actually, one pharmaceutical company has submitted all the information that they require to submit to the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority, SAPRA, or maybe some of you know it as MCC, the Medicines Control Council, as it was previously known before 2017 when it changed its name. This is where all medical products or health products are checked. Scientists sit with all the information from the trials and they look at it, and then only when SAPRA has approved it can we then guarantee that a vaccine can be used in this country. So before even talking about which vaccine, the first question as journalists we need to ask ourselves, is there a vaccine that has been approved by our local or our South African regulatory body? At this moment in time, no. But as Fatima shared with us this morning, there has been and it's called emergency procurement. So instead of taking months to approve the vaccine, SAPRA has put in place measures to make sure that they are able to do this in a shorter space of time so that health workers can get vaccinated first. When we are reporting on COVID, it's important that we are ethical and responsible. We also have to be socially responsible. And by socially responsible is making sure that we are not part of the problem, you know, creating anxiety for our readers. We need to refrain from being sensationalist or alarmist. So for instance, maybe you hear something and you don't know whether it's true or not. You can't report, when we're reporting about health issues, especially COVID-19 in this period, we cannot report on rumors or on hearsay. We need to be able to prove substantially what we are saying. We can be tempted to report that, they are political, like even when we're reporting on a political matter of the vaccines, whether the minister does not get along with so-and-so, we need to do it in a way that does not create alarm or sensationalism, particularly for the public. We need to ask ourselves, if I publish the story, or if my organization, media outlet publishes the story this way, will this cause panic? Does this inform people? Does it give them all the facts and all the information they need to know to make a sound decision or to be involved? And this is why we have to also communicate facts and be truthful in the information about the disease. I was very alarmed last week when a reputable, I don't want to name and shame in publication, so I will not say, but a reputable weekly news paper published an article about a prominent politician saying that he believes in 5G, that is in the vaccines, which has been proven to be wrong, right? And I think it is important that the publication was reporting on this issue. However, my reservations were with the fact that they quoted what this man was saying. They quoted everything, all the false information, and nowhere in the story did they say, however, science says that there is no 5G, or they didn't speak to a medical expert, a scientist, to counter the misinformation that they were reporting on. And I argue that that is irresponsible reporting, because we need to give our readers all the information, or our viewers all the information. So yes, report on the councillor or the mayor that is saying all the fake news or saying misinformation about COVID-19 vaccines. However, when you report on the misinformation, you also need to provide readers with the facts that have to be reliable, scientific, truthful, and come from verified sources. So yes, this mayor in this town said that he will not allow vaccines. He will burn down, let's say somebody said this, will burn down the building where the vaccines will be kept to vaccinate the people in this town. However, when we look at science, you can report on that and then say, but when we look at what scientists and scientific research shows us, that vaccines have been used for a number of years, for many years, to help fight diseases, for example, polio, and all the other diseases. So you are still reporting on what is the story, that this mayor is against the vaccine, but you're also empowering or giving your readers the information they know, the real information, so they don't just leave the story with false information. We need to be able to quote scientists, researchers, public health professionals, academics, and specialists to clarify public concerns about a situation. So you can't just listen to the Minister of Health. You need to, especially if you're in communities, is there a local professional, like a local doctor who's very well informed about COVID, who you can quote in the story, who's already trusted in the community. And I know it's sometimes difficult, especially with doctors or with health workers that work in government. They sometimes refuse to take interviews. So I'd advise that maybe you get someone in the private sector who maybe has a general practice and does not necessarily work for government, to code. And because you work in mostly a regionalized way, you can also get somebody who's trusted. Maybe there's a GP that everyone in your community really goes to and is trusted and is willing to do the interview. We also have to report, sorry about that. We have to also report on patients recovering. We also, not just the numbers, because I know I had to stop reporting a little bit on COVID because the numbers were causing me a lot of anxiety, and I needed to think about innovative ways to report on the virus that did not involve just talking about the death statistics, how many people are infected, recovering. So for instance, yes, there's many people who are dying now, but did you know that our recovery rate has been even during the second wave now? Yes, it used to be at 90% before we went into the second wave. And now our recovery rate is about 80%. What does that mean? So you don't just even write as a journalist that our recovery rate is at 80%. You need to explain it to our audiences. So we, like how I explained it the other day on radio, I said, 80% recovery means that if there are 10 people who were infected with COVID-19, 2 died, or not 2 died, sorry, 8 of them recovered. That's what it means, or 2 died, but like 8 recovered. So you need to, so sometimes, and I sometimes ask this even when I'm interviewing experts, okay, this statistic, how do I say this in a way that my readers, because I do mostly write, but now I do radio as well, and my listeners will hear this and understand it. So if you're in a family of 10, or if you're in an office of 8 and of 10, and all 10 of you are infected with COVID-19, 8 will recover. That's what a recovery rate means. So we need to find these simple ways of reporting the statistics that make sense to our readers, and that's not just numbers. We need to explain what the numbers mean, and we need to also provide solutions. So not just talk about, oh, people are dying, or in this region, but this is what the government is doing. If we need to test, so for instance, I've been seeing a lot of stories from Limpopo that because so many people traveled home during the December break, the infections in Limpopo have been rising. Actually, as we speak right now, the Committee of Health in Parliament is meeting with the Departments of Health from Eastern Cape and Limpopo, because the numbers have gone have grown so much over a short period of time. So this is something that we need to do. So then I would ask, what is the Department of Health, or what is the province, the people in the province doing? Have they created more testing sites? Are they testing more people? This is a way of trying to bring solutions, or here's the problem, but here's how you can solve it. So if we're saying that Limpopo is now a hotspot, or a certain municipality in Limpopo is now a hotspot, and you're a reporter in that region, then perhaps you include information about how people can quarantine and self-isolate, and why it's important to self-isolate, so that that could drive more people to stay indoors and self-isolate until the infection rate goes down. So these are ways in which we can use journalism while informing people, while holding the government accountable, while reporting on the so-called bad news. We can also use it as it's very important that during this time that we use it as a learning moment. Do not feel like you are repeating, the symptoms, or how you need to quarantine, or what are the solutions when you experience symptoms. You cannot over-report that. And it is important, research from across the world shows, from health journalists from across the world shows, that it's important and it's effective when we repeat the information for people. So here, I've been talking about reputable sources, especially for statistics and what's happening. I will send you also a resource list of national, like some of the ones that you can use from a South African perspective. But, it's always important to use national, local ministries of health. They have the statistics. So if you want accurate statistics of how many people are infected and how it happens, your national and provincial health departments are the place to go. If you want more information, maybe more generic information about COVID-19, how it works, vaccines, the World Health Organization is the leading reputable health source. You can quote information from the WHO, and it's reputable. Authorities in other government sectors, like I was saying earlier on, the Human Sciences Research Council, the South African Medical Research Council, and institutes of public health, like the the NICD, this Institute of Non-Communicable Diseases, and also schools of public health from different universities. A lot of universities are doing researches at the moment. And so it would be interesting maybe to call up the department, the health departments of your local universities, to ask them, are they studying the virus and how it works in your region? Because as a regional or as community newspapers, it's also important, you can't really report on the same or in the same way as the national radio stations or mainstream. So it's also important to contact your local universities, whether it's like the Limpopo, University of Limpopo, University of KZN, and all universities who are, I know a number of them are already doing research, trying to understand how the virus works. And usually they will be working with an academic hospital. An academic hospital is usually hospitals where student doctors go to learn and become interns and stuff like that, or they do their practicals. So what you find is that they sometimes, academic hospitals will ask patients to become participants in their research. So they actually would be studying the virus and how it works in people in your region or in your province. It might not necessarily be in your municipality, but you can bring it a bit more home by finding the university and what work they're doing. And if you're looking for more generic information, there are academic papers, there's new research. I check these two websites every single day about new research that's coming out about COVID-19 and what it says. And these are some of them. And also I'll send you specific links that are more generic to South Africa for you to use when you're looking for reputable sources for reporting on COVID-19 and vaccines. And when we're reporting on covering, especially a lot of the vaccine stuff that we'll report on will be based on new research or emerging research. So when we have new research or we're hearing new research from these scientists in our local universities or a research paper we're reading, these are some of the questions, these are some of the most important questions you have to ask. Does this study fit into the big picture? What does this mean on a bigger scale? So if, for example, I think everyone is really waiting for results on the local vaccines, the Oxford vaccine trial results for South Africa. What does it say about the vaccine and how it works in South Africans? What does this mean for South Africans? That's what you mean by the big picture. We have to also ask ourselves, how does this compare to other studies on the same issue? You can look at the study on the participants in Brazil, the participants also in the UK, to see what is happening and if this is saying the same thing. We have to ask ourselves, is this any new information? Number 4 is a very important question, especially in the context of pharmaceutical companies and people who hold patents on diseases, on vaccines and medicine. Who sponsored it? It's a declaration. For example, if I am writing a story as a journalist about my father, let's say, I have to declare it. The best decision is to take me off the story. But let's say for some or other reason, it's not possible. I have to then declare at the end of the story that these are my conflict of interests. And so who sponsored the study is also a declaration of conflict of interest. Usually if a study is being paid for or sponsored by a manufacturing company or people who would profit the most from this research being positive, then we do not think this, we do not take that as reputable research. I'll give you an example that's not related to the vaccines. A couple of years ago, I'm sure many of us know what vaping is, right? A lot of people are leaving cigarettes and now are buying the electronic cigarettes that we call e-cigarettes, and they're vaping and whatnot. A lot of the times when vaping earlier in the mid 2010s, when vaping was becoming popular here, or even across the world, actually, when vaping was becoming popular, a lot of the e-cigarette companies or even tobacco companies were sponsoring the research, the medical research that was being done on vaping. Can we believe a study that's being paid for by the people that will end up benefiting the most from this research, saying that vaping is much better than smoking and whatnot? No, this does not necessarily mean that their research is not true or necessarily true, but when we look at it, it just doesn't look good. It doesn't bode well that a person, like if I pay someone to write an article about me, it has to be labeled as paid content because I have paid for the service. Obviously, I don't want bad things to be written by me. The same thing we need to think about when we're looking at research. We also have to look at if this evolves from previous research that has been done, how this will change how doctors do their work, or how we as people, the public, will behave, and whether these findings matter to the readers right now, and if it matters, how. So always making sure to explain why research matters and why this is important for your readers. As Mahmoud is saying in the comments, in the chat, is like research must be independent and free of conflict of interest. That is very true. And the question about who sponsored it is how you find out if research is independent or not. Just a little bit, again, that's why I said that some of the questions will be answered here on how COVID-19 science works. This is a booklet that the Department of Health has put together. I went through the document, and a lot of the sources that the document uses are some of the reputable sources in that list that I shared earlier on. So maybe we need to go back to basics. Always explain what a vaccine is. We could take for granted that our readers know what a vaccine is, and they might not know. And until I know what a vaccine is in my head. I know theoretically what a vaccine is. But until I had to explain it to someone a couple of months ago, I struggled, and I had to sit down and say, okay, how do I explain what a vaccine is in the simplest way? And, this is some of, like I said, if you're writing a story and you just want to re-emphasize what a vaccine is for your readers, for your audiences, you can quote this manual, this document that is put together by the Department of Health and explain what a vaccine is and how it works. And I found that because they've taken so much time trying to explain it in the most simplest ways, they've done the work for us. And the government and the WHO will not benefit from misinforming us. That is why I believe, or they are considered, not just by me, but by many people, they are considered a reputable source. We also we've been hearing this term a lot, herd immunity. Herd immunity really means that when enough people in a community, in an area have been vaccinated, the virus then will not spread as much as we're seeing it spread now. So researchers show that the reason why, we're seeing COVID-19 statistics still going high is because there is no herd immunity yet. There's not been enough people who've been vaccinated, whose bodies have, because when you're vaccinated, it means that your body, your immune system has created antibodies and to fight the virus when you get it. So not enough people, when you haven't been vaccinated, you can't get herd immunity because not everyone has been vaccinated. But it's also important to know that herd immunity does not provide full protection to those who cannot safely be vaccinated. But what it does is it allows us, what it does is once people are vaccinated, this is a space where we are scientists say that we are more likely to not spread the virus at a rapid rate at this time. Shumela, do you have a question? I'll just mute them. And just moving right along. So I will, like I said, I will provide the booklet. I just wanted us to go into some of the vaccine science because it's really, it's imperative, it's absolutely important that we understand the science so that we are able to, we need to use the science to inform our readers, our listeners, and everyone, the people that consume our work as journalists. So here is just a short step program on how a vaccine is given to the public. I won't go into much detail because the book will also show you, but the vaccine must be proven to be safe and effective in large clinical trials. Clinical trials first start to happen in non-humans, so in animals, usually rats. The reason scientists, I've asked why a lot of studies start in rats, scientists have explained to me that scientists studies start in rats because the way the anatomy or the biology of rats works, or mice, is similar to how, it's comparable, and you can do it with many rats or mice. So they first start usually in mice, monkeys, rat, like there's in animals, in some kind of species of animals. And if a medicine or vaccine is proven to be safe and effective in non-humans, then a small scale of human trials begins, and then large scale clinical trials to see how people's bodies are reacting to the vaccine. And then what scientists do, they track these people for a specific amount of time. It's usually, they're usually monthly check-ins and whatnot to see how the vaccine is working in the person's body. Once these trials have been proven to be safe and effective, once enough trials have been done and enough people are safe, not getting sick, not having side effects that are really bad, then reviews are done to see the efficacy and safety, right? After reviews are done, a lot of the times the information is then given to the policy recommendations are done on how this vaccine should be used. And then an external panel of experts, mostly convened by the WHO, analyzes the results from the clinical trials. Once that is done, the panel then recommends whether or not to use the vaccine. And officials in different countries then decide whether to approve the vaccine. Like I said, the SAPRA in South Africa and different institutes in the different countries. And then based on the WHO recommendations, the vaccine is given to people that way. So you see, it's important we understand this process so we can explain it in simpler ways in our stories so people understand that it's not just somebody messing around in the lab, but it is there is a rigorous process that happens before a vaccine is opened up to the public. Mahmoud, I don't know if the sound is better. Can anyone just tell me if the sound has gotten better or is it still deteriorating? Please just let me know in the chat box. I see Tirsa has sent a question saying, is it safe to report about the COVID-19 vaccine in our communities yet? Because this is a really sensitive issue, especially with the issue of fake news during the rounds. I think, Tidiso, it is safe to start, or there is enough information out there in the public about how the vaccines, like what is happening with the vaccines, what has happened outside, that has been provided, that we can start reporting and telling the people. But I think the first point where we can start in our communities is explaining the importance of vaccines. Like, for example, you could just run a short story about what is a vaccine, how does it work in your body, why is it important, examples of successful vaccines in the past, and how will the COVID vaccine work according to some of the research that's out there. So I do think I do think that it is important that we do start reporting on it, so that when, for example, you do have health workers, as the vaccination program start, you don't want people in your communities to refuse to be vaccinated because they don't believe in the vaccine. And in order to combat the fake news, Tidiso, we need to report on the facts, right? Because if we don't report on the facts and we just let the fake news go, that's what people are going to believe in. That's what people are going to believe instead of the facts. So we need to come in with the facts, with the information from the scientists, from the departments of health, from experts that's combating the fake news. We will only combat the fake news by reporting accurately on the vaccines, on the pandemic. Again, this is another example on what are steps that are taken to ensure that the vaccine is safe. This is some information. I was just taking bits and pieces of the resource list to show you some of the information and how you can use it in stories. This is a story on its own. You maybe call up your local, your provincial health department and to get a quote or two, and then, like I said, find a local doctor or even somebody who is not necessarily an expert, who's not necessarily a local person, but is an expert, to talk about why is the vaccine safe. You put that into a story, you are empowering readers, your community, with the right information. And therefore, so when somebody makes the decision not to take the vaccine, they are making that decision based on facts and not on fake news. Questions, these are some of the questions, and some of these questions you've asked, but these are some of the questions I think that we also need to answer in stories to our audiences. Who should receive the first dose and subsequent doses of their vaccine? Fatima answered that question. Who decides who is allowed into the queue to receive the vaccine and in what order? The Department of Health a week ago told us the stages in which, or the phases of the vaccine rollout program. Like we said, phase 1 will be health workers, and then phase 2 will be people who are living with comorbidities. This is information that people need to know. People in your community need to know when they will get the vaccine. And so these are some of the information that we can put out there. There are stories. I mean, thinking here, there's already about 6 or 5 stories that could have been written about the vaccine just from today's session. What special advantages are given to the country where a vaccine is developed, if any? This is a South African question. We have 2 trials clinical trials of vaccines being done in South Africa. Does this guarantee that we're going to get vaccines from the pharmaceutical companies? Well, in actual fact, it's no, right? And the answer is that this was not worked into the contracts when the vaccination started. But a caveat that's important, it is important, it is a big thing, or it's important also that the vaccine is being trialed in South Africa. Why? Because then we know how the biology of South Africans, how our bodies work, the environment, what we eat, the air we breathe, everything that makes us unique biologically, how we will know which vaccine works best in our environment. For example, a lot of research sometimes is done in Europe or in other parts of the world, and then medicine doesn't work in the same way, or drugs don't work in the same way in other parts of the world because they were tested on a certain population and not another one. And so this is some information that you can provide, especially to combat the fake news where people say, why are we being tested in the vaccine? What's happening? Say, no, it's important to develop, to conduct clinical trials because it gives us a better chance. However, as experts have said, it is not to advantage for the clinical trials to just be done here and for us not to have secured doses of the vaccine if it is proven to be safe. So it is like, those are 2 informations that we need to give our readers, our listeners, and whatnot. And these are some of the other questions. I won't go through them because I don't want to just talk so much. I would like to open it up to some of the other questions that you may have so that we can deal with them tomorrow as well in our next session. And so with all that's been said, I'd like to end the session here. What is our responsibilities to our communities as journalists? Sorry for the typo there, as journalists, not as journalists. What is our responsibilities given the information that we've shared today? What do you think is our responsibilities to the communities that we live in to give information about the vaccine? Anyone? I think one of our biggest, responsibilities is to give people helpful information. So not to tell people just about what the bad stuff, like what I was saying, the statistics, the death statistics, how many people are infected every day, but also give them solutions, right? To say, okay, if you're experiencing symptoms, this is the best way. The scientifically best way to be safe is to isolate. Perhaps you can even ask, a lot of us come from communities where people are struggling. Does quarantining or isolating in a rural setting differ from in an urban setting? If we live in a rural area, in like people share spaces, a bedroom with their family or other members of their family, that person can isolate. So what's the next thing that we need to present the information we need? We need to ask our local departments of health, where are the field hospitals? How does one get admitted into a field hospital? Where are the different field hospitals located in your region? These are this is the information on how we can meet our many deadlines of producing news during this time in a way that is helpful. And let me tell you, I was doing research for a media organization around their COVID research, around how they covered COVID. And as I was putting the statistics together, I discovered that all their stories, their most read stories over the past year, are the stories about COVID where they provided their readers with information. Whether it's information of how to quarantine, what do the new regulations mean? Where are the field hospitals? Where are the government free testing sites in there? It was a Gauteng-based publication in Gauteng. Those are the top 5, all top 5 read stories were stories that informed the public. It wasn't just stories about statistics. It was stories that gave people information that they could even pass on. So for instance, every day I get like messages on Facebook, on Twitter, sometimes on my WhatsApp, people asking me, hey, my mom is showing symptoms, where can I go? Where can I go to get tested? I live in this part, we don't have a Lancet. I had to call up, it was in the Northwest, I had to call up the Department of Health and be like, where can people go test for free in the province? Provided that information. And I told a different publication, you need to publish this as a list. What you do is you're doing two things. You're playing your role as, holding the government accountable by finding the information. You're meeting your content deadline. You're meeting your content deadline, but you are also, providing information that is helpful to the readers. And you're also getting hits on your website, because trust me, many, many people are Googling where to get tested in Taung, where to get tested in Mopani district, where to get tested wherever it is that you are based. And this is how you can hit 5 birds with one stone. Get a story out, get readership going on your website if you have a website, inform the public, and have correct information. Alison, I see your hands up, and then I'll get to Mfanozile's question in the chat. You can go ahead, Alison. I think you're still muted, Alison.
I'm so sorry about that. Ponzo, thanks. Yeah, I think what is important for me at least, but I think this might help everyone else too, is to understand the importance of breaking it down for our audiences. Because all of these things that's flying around is all of scientific nature, and and even the government. What I always try to do is take even government issued statements and break it down to as simple as possible. It basically needs to come across in a way that each person who hears the story.
I'm trying to mute him, and just hold on.
Yes,
I've muted him. Yeah.
So when we convey the news, it needs to be done on a level where whoever hears it, because we don't have the power to reach absolutely everyone. So the person who gets it needs to be able to educate the next person. It's about empowering people, because at the end of the day, an informed person can make safer choices. So I mean, in 2020, we've seen all these warnings and everything that's gone out. But I think even today, we in my own community, we struggle to still get safe distancing, and because people tend to shut down when they see certain things. So it's about repetition, reminding our audiences of what the key message is, but also to explain it to them, to not expect them to just be fed by the media. And we need to encourage them to also ask questions, so that they can gain proper understanding. And then of course, on ourselves is the responsibility to educate ourselves, to get a proper understanding of the thing, and not just take content and run with it. We need to also ask the right questions, because at the end of the day, we are the intermediator between community and whoever is on the other side of the information. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alison. Very strong points that you've made there. Sometimes when scientists always laugh when I interview them. They'll be going on about like their scientific stuff, and I'm like, okay, Dr. So-and-so or Prof. So-and-so, you are speaking, do you have kids? I always use this example. Do you have children? Do you still have a parent who's alive, or an aunt, an old aunt, an elderly family member? If they say yes, I'm like, what's their name? They say Margaret. I'm like, okay, think about your Aunt Margaret, or think about your 15-year-old or your 10-year-old daughter. How do you explain what you do to them? So because let me tell you, scientists will speak, even experts like Fatima, because they speak in their expert terms, and sometimes it's not understandable to us as people, as journalists, because We are not experts in the field. And so it's very important that we also ask, can you please explain this to me in the simplest way possible? And sometimes when you relay it to their family member, something that is personal to them, they find it easier to explain. See a few questions as we wrap up in the comment section. Mfanazile says that one of the questions that we pick up when reporting about COVID vaccine, which is a product of science, research and development, is that why African traditional medicine is not given enough space in the media, especially mainstream, in terms of reporting. Sai, I see your hand is up and you will just speak when I am done with the questions in the chat here as we wrap up. Permission to go just 5 or 10 minutes over, even though we were so great with keeping time the whole day, but I see there's a lot of interaction. And maybe some of these questions we can even discuss as in first thing in the morning tomorrow. So this is a very important question, you know, and I've asked traditional healers this question because I wanted the answer. It was for a different story. And one traditional healer said to me was that we cannot expect the same Western principles that govern kind of medicine, right? To govern traditional medicine. And there is a space for traditional medicine, traditional methods, but we need to be responsible in also reporting about that. For example, many of you know, I know it as umhlonyane and lingana. I'm forgetting the English name for it, and I'm just gonna quickly Google it so I don't leave anyone out. The scientific name for it is Artemisia afra. You know, it's a plant. I grew up, my grandmother, every time I had a flu, a cold, a chest infection, she would give it to me to alleviate that. It's an indigenous knowledge or indigenous herbal traditional plant that can be used to treat the symptoms. It is not the cure. However, at the beginning of the pandemic, we saw a lot of misinformation saying that even in Madagascar, I mean, the president of Madagascar said that this was a cure, called Lingana and Artemisia a cure for COVID. It's not a cure. So we need to be responsible in balancing, saying, okay, these are, and also, yes, we know a lot of plants in the traditional names, like I've said it in the Setswana and the isiZulu name, but we can also go back, there's chemistry in medicine, right? We can go back to experts that are experts in botanicals or plants and ask, what are the healing properties of these plants? But it is also important to ensure that we do not say it cures. So there's a very delicate balance that we need to do. And if you remember the HIV AIDS denialism phase, there were a lot of people were using, there were a lot of very desperate people using traditional medicine in the wrong ways, in ways that they needed, at that point, they needed to be on ARVs instead, right? So a story I did a couple of years ago was I went to KZN, which was one of the provinces that was most hard hit by the AIDS epidemic at its peak, right? What the government did in KZN is it trained traditional healers on how to counsel people for HIV, how to detect. So you coming in for a consultation at a traditional healer, let's say I'm a traditional healer, I throw my bones, I do the traditional healing, but I also offer you an HIV test at the end, because there is a point where traditional and Western medicine can work together to help people. And us as journalists need to find that rhythm without being irresponsible in our reporting. Olisi also talks about how, I hope that answers your question, Mfanazile. Policy talks about how it's our responsibility as journalists to provide facts and not misleading information. This is very true. So how people can prevent themselves from getting sick, dying. These are some of the ways in which we create news content. Lungi also talking about that, seeing that this is a new virus, some people do not trust the effectiveness of the vaccine due to the time it's taken to develop this. Part of it is that there is still no vaccine for HIV. How can we write stories that address such concerns? This is very true, Lungi. A lot of people are saying, like I said earlier on, scientists say it takes, the shortest vaccine ever created was created in 4 years. And a lot of people are asking, how are we then able to create a vaccine within a year, right? This is a question that you would pose to a scientific expert. I'll try find a link. There is a link that I read by a scientific expert explaining how and why the COVID vaccine was developed faster than other vaccines in the past. And this is information that we need to give, these are the questions we need to ask scientists so that we're able to give the answers. And sometimes the answers are not easy. Like, I don't remember right now what was said, but it had something to do with around technologies as well. So this is a question that I would pose to someone from the South African Medical Research Council, someone from the HSRC, or an epidemiologist, or an expert in the field of vaccine development, and then they give you the answer, and then you read research as well. Tidiso says he hasn't done any stories on the vaccine as yet. I've been relying mostly on government press releases on the issue. This workshop was really on point because we too have been in the dark side. Thank you so much, Tidiso, for that, and I hope that even tomorrow we learn more. And thank you, Chiwa, for providing the name. It's also called the wormwood herb, and there is a way that we can report. It alleviates. There is no cure for. The reason we need a vaccine is because there is no cure for COVID-19, and therefore we can report on the local traditional healer who's making concoctions for, let's say, your headache, your fever, your cough, but we have to also state that this is not a solution or a cure to the virus. Sai, sorry I took so long to get to your hand, and then we will wrap up, and I think tomorrow we will continue this discussion even more. Sai, I see your hands up, you can unmute.
Yes, I think, Ponzo, the tree you are talking about is Blochom. I'm not sure if I'm correct.
No, it's the wormwood herb, or Artemisia, as it's formerly called in English.
Wow, okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay, mine is, I've noted with the current situation around my area, I think even other areas, the government mortuaries are full. The hospitals are full. And under normal conditions, when someone died, especially from home in the rural areas, the process will be, people will call the police, and the police will dispatch the government mortuary van. They will come and pick the body to the government mortuary for the purpose of conducting the post-mortem, so that they can determine the cause of death. But currently, if someone dies from home, when you call the police will just say the mortuary is full. You will then have to arrange your own mortuary to come and pick up the body. The private mortuaries will come and pick up the body, take it into their mortuary, and I don't know how are they getting it right. They will just follow the I don't know which process they are following to get the death certificate. Thereafter, the body get buried. Now, the body is not tested, and some of the deaths are COVID-related with the symptoms that the person has been going through. And we see every day there are statistics that are shown that so many cases, so many people died. So I'm not so sure how can one report that, because I see a gap from what the Department of Health is doing, and from what the department is portraying out there to saying these are, cases on a daily basis reported and how many deaths. But we see on a daily basis, those cases, as far as I've observed, it's twice or three times what they are reporting, because there are a lot of deaths that are not accounted for. Because if someone will die from a hospital, they'll run the test and give the results, and such results is the one that are reported. But,
yes.
But a bigger number that is dying from home, taken straight to the mortuaries, private mortuaries are full, and private mortuaries, they do not conduct or run tests for COVID. And there is no process whereby if you went and pick up the body from wherever and then you bring it to your own mortuary, this is the process there therefore with the department, so that they can run the test before the body, the family can bury that body. So I'm not so sure how can we report that, because I think it's a gap.
Yes, there is a gap there, right? So, and this is the importance. This is the importance of community media. That yes, on a high level, government says certain things and certain things are happening, but you have an advantage more than me, a journalist, or even other journalists in national newsrooms, because you see what's happening. I would advise that you send a media questions to the local Department of Health, to be like, these are the government regulations on how to deal with a corpse when someone is suspected to have died of COVID-19. Here's what has happened to these families. You can omit the names for the safety of the families, but here's what's happening in my community. How does the department respond to that? And that is a story. Do you see how you can report on it? So you report on the incident happening, that regulations, let's say, for like you're saying, it's proven to be true, they are not abiding by the regulations on how to handle COVID suspected deaths, right? And then you also say, this is the right procedure. So this has happened to families. However, this is the procedure as said by government. And this is what the provincial government is saying they're going to remedy. So you see, or this is if your loved one dies and they died because of COVID, or you suspect it was COVID and these procedures are not taken, these are the steps that you can take to make sure the right process is taken. So there is a story there. There's always a story even in the fake news, or in the not understanding things about COVID-19, that is a story in itself. And when you don't understand something, finding the information could be the story. And so I think, I'm already 10 minutes over time, and I do know that there are deadlines to be met and everything. I think I'd like to leave it there. Thank you so much for the interactions. I'll take the last round of questions, if there are any, or comments rather. We'll keep the questions for tomorrow. But I think today was, I learned so much from, I've interviewed and facilitated panels that Fatima has been on many last year, but listening to her all the time about the importance of equitable access. So it's not just about vaccines. It's about it's not just about getting the vaccines, that people don't believe the vaccines, but it's what does this mean for public health? What does it mean when a pharmaceutical company refuses to reveal the price of a vaccine? We can talk about that and talk about the science and the importance of being vaccinated in the same stories, because this is information that we need to provide our readers. So I'd just like to thank Chiwa, who's been in the background and will email you today's slides and the resource list after I've sent it to her. And we'll meet again tomorrow at about 9:20. If you can come in just a little bit early, so we start promptly at 9:30, it would be great. But for me, this was really awesome. And tomorrow, the program, there is going to be another guest speaker who's going to tell us about more of the process of what the government needs to do to ensure that pharmaceutical companies do not take advantage of us, or as a country, when we're trying to acquire a vaccine, and also give us the historical account of what has civil society and activists done in the past years to ensure a vaccine that is safe. But we'll also, because I saw a lot of the questions were around how do we report, we'll also have a session where we have a brainstorming on what possible stories that we can do. And because we're regional papers, we're not competing here, we can all cover the same things, because maybe a local radio station is in English and the other one is in isiXhosa or Kasepedi, and so we can take the same content ideas and use them in our communities for the better of it. So that is what we're going to do tomorrow, and thank you again for listening, and see you guys all tomorrow. Thank you so much. Bye everyone.
Bye.